What starts as a simple, unusual stone found by a farmer's dog quickly turns into a discovery that not only transforms his struggling farm into a historical landmark, but also rewrites the history of human civilization itself. James Mitchell had always dreamed of running a successful farm just like his grandfather had. His 200-acre property in the sun-baked hills of New Mexico had been in his family for 4 generations, and every inch of the land held precious memories of better times. The old oak tree near the farmhouse still bore the initials his father had carved as a boy, and the creaky wooden swing his grandfather built still hung from its strongest branch, swaying gently in the hot desert wind. But the past few years had been merciless. The devastating drought that had gripped the region had turned his once fertile soil into an unforgiving wasteland. Where rows of corn once stretched toward the horizon, only cracked earth remained. The irrigation systems his father had meticulously installed now lay mostly dormant, their pipes carrying only a fraction of the water they once did. Each morning James would wake before sunrise, hoping to see clouds gathering in the distance, but the sky remained stubbornly clear, as if nature itself had forgotten how to rain. The bank's threatening letters were piling up on his kitchen table, each one more urgent than the last. James knew he had only months left before he might lose everything his family had built. The thought of being the Mitchell who finally lost the farm kept him awake at night, tossing and turning as he calculated and recalculated his dwindling finances. The local farmers' market, where his family had once sold their prized vegetables and fruits, now barely recognized him. His regular customers had gradually disappeared, forced to seek produce elsewhere as his crop yields diminished season after season. His only companion through these hard times was Max, a 3-year-old Australian shepherd who had been by his side since he was a pup. The dog had an uncanny intelligence that sometimes made James wonder if he understood every word spoken to him. On particularly difficult days, when the weight of potential failure seemed too heavy to bear, Max would rest his head on James's lap, his deep brown eyes offering silent comfort. The dog had become more than just a pet. He was a loyal friend who seemed to share both the burden of the farm's struggles and the hope for its recovery. But lately, even Max's behavior had changed. Instead of following James around during his daily chores as he usually did, the dog had developed an obsession with the far corner of the property, a rocky area that had never been suitable for farming. For hours, he would stand there, staring at the ground with an intensity that James had never seen before. Sometimes he would start digging frantically, only to stop and look back at James with what seemed like frustration when called away. The farm's decline had affected the entire community. The Mitchell farm had once been a cornerstone of the local economy, providing jobs during harvest season and supplying fresh produce to nearby restaurants. Now, James could barely afford to hire seasonal workers, and the restaurants had long since found other suppliers. The old-timers at the local diner would shake their heads sadly when he walked in, remembering how his grandfather used to deliver crates of the sweetest tomatoes they'd ever tasted. Sarah, who ran the town's small veterinary clinic and had known James since high school, often stopped by to check on Max and bring coffee. She seemed to be the only person who still believed in the farm's potential, always offering words of encouragement, even as others in town had written it off as another casualty of the changing times. "Your grandfather weathered the Dust Bowl," she'd remind him. "Mitchell blood doesn't give up easily." But even Sarah's unwavering support couldn't change the harsh reality of the numbers. The last harvest had barely covered the cost of seeds and fuel, let alone made a dent in the mounting debt. The ancient tractor, which had faithfully ploughed these fields for decades, now sat idle more often than not, its repair costs beyond what James could afford. He had started taking odd jobs in town to make ends meet, fixing fences and helping at construction sites, each day away from the farm feeling like a small betrayal of his family's legacy. The local agricultural extension office had suggested switching to drought-resistant crops, but the transition costs were prohibitive. James had experimented with a small plot of desert-adapted plants, but the learning curve was steep and time was running out. The well-meaning advice from agricultural consultants and bank managers had started to sound like a chorus of voices, telling him what he already knew: the farm as it existed was no longer viable. What James didn't know was that Max's strange behavior wasn't about the failing crops at all. The dog had sensed something deep beneath the earth's surface, something that had lain undisturbed for thousands of years. While James saw only another patch of useless, drought-stricken land, Max had detected what would soon prove to be a discovery that would change not just James's life, but our understanding of human history itself. As the sun set on another difficult day, James sat on the old porch swing, watching Max once again pace around that same corner of the property. The dog would dig for a few moments, then stop and bark, as if calling for James's attention. But after months of struggling with the farm's problems, James had grown accustomed to ignoring things he couldn't fix or understand. He simply assumed. Max had found another rabbit burrow, or perhaps the den of a desert fox. Little did he know that tomorrow would change everything. As he headed inside for another sleepless night of worrying about the farm's future, he had no idea that his loyal companion had already discovered something that would soon turn his struggling farm into the center of worldwide attention. The simple act of following his dog's persistent behavior would lead to a revelation that would not only save his family's legacy, but would force historians to rewrite their textbooks and archaeologists to rethink everything they thought they knew about ancient American civilizations. The night was unusually quiet. Even the coyotes that usually howled in the distance seemed to be holding their breath, as if nature itself was anticipating the momentous discovery that dawn would bring. As James finally drifted off to sleep, Max remained at his post by the bedroom window, his eyes fixed on the spot where he knew something extraordinary waited to be found. The next morning began like any other on the Mitchell farm. James woke before sunrise, his muscles aching from yesterday's failed attempt to repair the irrigation system. As he made his morning coffee, he noticed something unusual. Max wasn't in his usual spot by the kitchen door, waiting for breakfast. Through the window, James could see his dog already out in the field, frantically digging in that same corner of the property he'd been obsessed with for weeks. But this morning was different. Max's barking had a new urgency to it, a tone that James had never heard before. It wasn't his usual playful bark or his warning call about coyotes. This was something else entirely, a sound that seemed to demand immediate attention. James tried to ignore it at first, focusing on his mental checklist of overdue repairs and pending bills. Yet Max's barking grew more insistent, echoing across the barren fields. All right, I'm coming," James called out, setting down his coffee cup with a sigh. The early morning sun was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and orange as he made his way across the cracked earth. As he approached, he could see that Max had dug an impressively deep hole, much larger than his usual rabbit-chasing excavations. The dog stood at the edge of the pit, tail wagging frantically, looking from James to the hole and back again, with an almost human-like expression of excitement. When James finally peered into the hole, his heart skipped a beat. Something was gleaming in the early morning light, partially exposed by Max's determined digging. At first glance, it looked like a large stone, but stones don't usually have such perfectly straight edges or such an unusual metallic sheen. James knelt down, his knees cracking in protest, and carefully brushed away some of the loose dirt. The object was about the size of a football, but its surface was unlike anything James had ever seen. It appeared to be made of a dark, polished material that seemed to absorb the morning light rather than reflect it. But what truly caught his attention were the intricate patterns etched across its surface. geometric shapes, and swirling lines that couldn't possibly have been created by natural processes. "What have you found, boy?" James whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Max whined in response, pawing at the ground near the object. As James continued to clear away the dirt, he uncovered more of the artifact. The patterns weren't random. Decorations. They appeared to be some kind of writing system, but unlike any he'd ever seen before. The symbols seemed to flow across the surface in a way that made his eyes want to follow them, as if they were telling a story he could almost, but not quite, understand. James's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone to take pictures. The morning sun had fully risen now, and in the clear light he could see that the hole Max had dug wasn't just a random spot. There were subtle differences in the soil color, suggesting that something larger might be buried deeper. The thought made his pulse race. Should he keep digging? Should he call someone? Who do you even call when you find something like this? He remembered Sarah, the local vet, mentioning that her brother worked as an archaeologist at the state university. At the time, it had seemed like just another piece of small-town conversation. But now... James checked his watch. It was barely 6:30 a.m., but this couldn't wait. As he pulled out his phone to make the call, Max continued to dig, revealing more of the strange object. The call to Sarah went straight to voicemail. She was probably already busy with her morning rounds at the clinic. James left a message, trying to sound calm, but knowing his voice betrayed his excitement. "Sarah, it's James. Listen, Max found something on the farm, something unusual. I need to talk to your brother. It's important, really important." While waiting for a call back, James couldn't resist the urge to keep digging. He ran to his truck to grab a shovel, his mind racing with possibilities. The bank notification on his phone reminded him of yesterday's bounced check. But for the first time in months, the crushing weight of his financial troubles felt distant, overshadowed by the mystery literally emerging from his soil. As he carefully widened the hole, more details of the artifact became visible. The material didn't look like stone anymore. It had an almost metallic quality, but unlike any metal he'd ever seen. It wasn't rusty or corroded, as you might expect from something buried in the ground. Instead, it looked as pristine as if it had been buried yesterday, yet something about it spoke of incredible age. Max hadn't left the site for a moment, alternating between digging alongside James and standing guard over their discovery. Every few minutes, he would nose at different spots around the hole, as if trying to tell James where to dig next. The dog's behavior was becoming increasingly excited, suggesting that whatever they'd found might be part of something much larger. By 8 a.m., James had uncovered enough to see that the object was roughly cylindrical, with what appeared to be a sealed seam running along one side. The symbols covered every visible surface, arranged in precise patterns that seemed to hint at some greater meaning. He had deliberately avoided trying to move or lift the artifact, instinctively knowing that this was something that needed professional attention. Finally, his phone rang. It was Sarah, and she sounded out of breath. "James, I got your message. What's going on? Is Max okay?" The concern in her voice made him realize how his cryptic message must have sounded. "Max is fine, better than fine. Sarah, I need you to contact your brother right away. Max found something I can't explain. It looks ancient, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. There are symbols, writings maybe, and the material it's made of. I don't even know how to describe it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was more measured. "James, are you sure about this? My brother's pretty busy with his research and—" "Sarah," James interrupted, his voice firm. "I'm looking at something that shouldn't exist. Something that couldn't exist. Not here, not in New Mexico, not anywhere. I need someone who knows what they're doing to look at this. Please." Perhaps it was the urgency in his voice, Or maybe she could hear the mixture of fear and excitement that he was trying to control. But Sarah's tone changed. Okay, I'll call him right now. But James, don't touch anything else. Don't dig anymore. Don't tell anyone else about this yet. If this is what I think it might be, what do you think it might be? Let's wait for Marcus to take a look. He'll know what to do. I'll call him right now and get back to you. Just stay there and don't let anyone else near it. As James hung up the phone, he noticed something he hadn't before. The morning sun had reached the perfect angle, and for a brief moment, the symbols on the artifact seemed to shimmer with an inner light of their own. Max let out a low whine, and James felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Whatever they had found, he had a feeling it was about to change everything. The next few hours felt like an eternity. James paced around the discovery site, alternating between staring at the mysterious artifact and scanning the horizon for approaching vehicles. He'd fashioned a makeshift shelter using an old tarp to protect the site from the harsh New Mexican sun, while Max maintained his vigilant guard, growling at any desert wildlife that dared approach too closely. Sarah had called back within 30 minutes, her voice tinged with barely contained excitement. Her brother Marcus was already on his way, having dropped everything the moment she described what James had found. "He's bringing some colleagues," she'd said. "They should be there by early afternoon. James, he asked so many questions when I told him about the symbols you described. I've never heard him so animated." As James waited, his mind raced with possibilities. The rational part of him tried to temper his expectations. Perhaps it was just some elaborate piece of modern art that had somehow ended up buried on his land, or maybe some forgotten piece of mining equipment. But every time he looked at those impossibly precise symbols, every time he noticed how the material seemed to drink in the sunlight, those rational explanations felt increasingly inadequate. The sound of approaching vehicles finally broke through his thoughts. 2 dust clouds appeared on the horizon, growing larger as they approached along the worn dirt road leading to his farm. The first vehicle was Sarah's familiar blue pickup truck. Behind it came a large white van with university logos emblazoned on its sides. James felt his heart rate quicken. This was starting to feel very real. Sarah was the first to reach him, practically jumping out of her truck before it had fully stopped. Her brother Marcus followed close behind, along with 3 other people carrying various pieces of equipment. Marcus was younger than James had expected, probably in his mid-30s, with the kind of intense energy you might expect from someone who spent their life pursuing ancient mysteries. "Mr. Mitchell?" Marcus extended his hand, but his eyes were already fixed on the tarp-covered excavation site. "I'm Dr. Marcus Chen. Thank you for calling us, and thank you for not disturbing the site further. May we?" He gestured toward the tarp. James nodded, suddenly feeling like a stranger on his own land, as the team quickly set up what looked like surveying equipment around the site. Max watched the proceedings with intense interest, refusing to leave his post, even when Sarah offered him treats. It was as if the dog somehow understood the importance of what he had discovered. When Marcus first laid eyes on the artifact, he went completely still. The other archaeologists gathered around, and an unusual silence fell over the group. James watched their faces, trying to read their expressions. He'd expected scientific detachment, maybe even skepticism. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like awe. "This is—" Marcus started, then stopped, shaking his head. He turned to one of his colleagues. "Patricia, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" The woman nodded slowly, already pulling out a camera with various attachments. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus said, turning back to James, "what you've found here, it shouldn't exist. These symbols, they share characteristics with several ancient writing systems, but they're arranged in a way that suggests a level of mathematical and astronomical understanding that shouldn't have been possible in pre-Columbian America, and the material—" He reached out, stopping just short of touching the artifact's surface. "We'll need to run tests, but I've never seen anything like it." The next few hours were a blur of activity. The team set up a proper canopy over the site and brought in specialized photography equipment. They took hundreds of photos from every angle, used strange devices to scan the artifact's surface, and meticulously mapped every inch of the surrounding area. James watched as they worked, catching fragments of their excited conversations about impossible metallurgy and advanced geometric principles. As the sun began to set, Marcus finally pulled James aside. His expression was serious. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to be very clear about something. What we've found here, it's potentially revolutionary. The craftsmanship alone suggests capabilities that we didn't think existed in this part of the world thousands of years ago. But the mathematics encoded in these symbols—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say this could change everything we think we know about ancient American civilizations." "What happens now?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "With your permission, we need to set up a proper archaeological dig. This object, it's just the beginning. The ground-penetrating radar is showing, well, there's something much larger down there. We'll need to bring in more equipment, more experts. We'll need to secure the site, set up proper security." Marcus trailed off, watching James's expression. "Of course, as the landowner, you have certain rights. The university is prepared to—" "Will I lose my farm?" James interrupted. It was the question that had been nagging at him all day, even as he'd watched the excitement unfold. "If this is as important as you say," Marcus smiled. "Mr. Mitchell, if this is what we think it is, your farm is about to become one of the most important archaeological sites in North America. The university will want to lease the land, set up proper facilities. There will be grants, research, funding. Trust me, your financial worries are over. This discovery, it's going to change your life. It's going to change everything." As if to emphasize the point, Patricia called out from the excavation site. She was examining new readings. From their ground-penetrating radar equipment, her expression a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "Dr. Chen, you need to see this. The structure below, it's massive, and it's geometric, perfect geometric patterns, at least 30 feet down." Marcus rushed back to join his colleague, leaving James standing there, trying to process everything. Sarah approached, putting a comforting hand on his arm. "You okay?" she asked softly. James looked at Max, who was still watching over the site with unwavering attention. "My dog," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "My dog just rewrote history." Sarah squeezed his arm, and they stood together in silence, watching. As the team continued their work under the growing darkness, portable lights now illuminating what was quickly becoming the most important patch of dirt in New Mexico. What neither James nor the archaeology team knew yet was that this was just the beginning. The mysterious artifact and whatever lay beneath it would soon attract attention far beyond the academic world, drawing interest from governments, religious leaders, and others who had their own theories about its origins. The quiet Mitchell farm was about to become the center of a worldwide controversy that would challenge everything we thought we knew about human civilization. The initial excitement of the discovery quickly gave way to a new set of complications. Within days, the Mitchell farm had transformed into something unrecognizable. A small city of white tents and temporary structures had sprung up around the excavation site, with dozens of researchers, technicians, and security personnel coming and going at all hours. The quiet solitude that James had known his entire life was replaced by the constant hum of generators and the beeping of scientific equipment. The university had moved with unprecedented speed, securing emergency funding and necessary permits in a matter of days rather than the usual months. But with that speed came chaos. James found himself overwhelmed by a constant stream of paperwork, permits, agreements, insurance forms, and confidentiality documents. Each morning seemed to bring new people asking for his signature on increasingly complex legal documents. We need to maintain absolute secrecy until we understand exactly what we're dealing with, Marcus had explained, pushing another stack of papers across James's kitchen table. If word gets out too soon, before we can properly secure and document everything. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They'd both seen the suspicious vehicles driving slowly past the farm, amateur archaeologists and treasure hunters drawn by the unusual activity. Max, who had been the hero of the discovery, was now relegated to watching from a distance. The archaeological team had established a strict perimeter around the site, and even James needed special permission to get close to the excavation. The dog spent his days pacing along the security fence, whining softly whenever the teams brought up new pieces of the mysterious artifact. The initial find had indeed proven to be just the tip of something much larger. Ground-penetrating radar had revealed an enormous geometric structure buried deep beneath the farm, its perfect symmetry defying any natural explanation. But progress in reaching it was agonizingly slow. Each layer of soil had to be carefully removed and documented, each fragment catalogued and photographed. "I know it's frustrating," Sarah said one evening, bringing James his third cup of coffee. She'd taken to stopping by more frequently, becoming a welcome bridge between James's familiar world and the scientific circus that had invaded it. "But Marcus says they're finding things that challenge everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian civilization, the metallurgy alone." She trailed off as James's phone buzzed again. Another call from the bank. He'd been avoiding them for days, unsure of what he could legally say about the dramatic changes to his property. The university's lease payment was still being processed, caught up in bureaucratic red tape, and his immediate financial problems hadn't magically disappeared. But money wasn't the only concern keeping James awake at night. Strange things had started happening around the farm. Equipment would mysteriously malfunction near the excavation site. Sophisticated scientific instruments would give impossible readings, then return to normal when moved away from the area. Several researchers had reported vivid, unsettling dreams after working long hours near the buried structure. One morning, James found Max barking frantically at the main artifact, which had been carefully moved to a special containment unit for study. The dog's behavior was unusual enough that Patricia, the team's imaging specialist, decided to run another scan. What they found sent ripples of excitement and concern through the entire team. "The internal structure is changing," Patricia explained, showing James the comparison of scans taken just days apart. "It's subtle, but these patterns here, they're different. It's as if the object is reorganizing itself at a molecular level." The implications were staggering. If the artifact was indeed actively changing, it suggested technology far beyond anything they'd expected to find. Marcus's team quickly set up continuous monitoring equipment, but each new reading seemed to raise more questions than answers. Then came the first major setback. During a particularly delicate phase of the excavation, one of the graduate students noticed something odd about the soil composition. Further testing revealed trace amounts of an unknown substance that required immediate safety protocols. Work ground to a halt as environmental teams in hazmat suits descended on the site. "It's probably nothing," Marcus assured James, but his voice lacked conviction. "Standard procedure for any unusual chemical signatures. We just need to run more tests." But the tests took days, then weeks. The university's lawyers became involved, concerned about liability issues. Local officials started asking questions about potential environmental impacts. The steady stream of progress reports slowed to a trickle as the team focused on addressing safety concerns. James found himself lying awake at night, staring at his ceiling, wondering if he'd made a terrible, Mistake. The farm, which had been struggling but simple, was now a maze of bureaucratic complications and scientific mysteries. Even the weather seemed to be responding to the change. Unusual storm clouds would gather over the excavation site, only to dissipate without dropping a single raindrop. Max's behavior became increasingly erratic. The dog would wake James in the middle of the night, barking at empty air. During the day, he would sit for hours, staring at the buried structure's location, occasionally tilting his head as if listening to something no one else could hear. Sarah had examined him twice, but found nothing physically wrong. "Animals are sensitive to things we can't perceive," she'd said, trying to sound reassuring. "Maybe he's picking up on something we don't understand yet." The "yet" hung in the air, heavy with implications. The local community's reaction added another layer of complexity. While most respected the security perimeter and confidentiality requirements, rumors began to spread. Some locals claimed to see strange lights over the farm at night. Others reported unusual interference with electronic devices when driving past. The local diner became a hotbed of speculation, with theories ranging from government conspiracies to alien artifacts. James found himself increasingly isolated. His neighbors, once friendly, now viewed him with a mixture of suspicion and envy. The confidentiality agreements meant he couldn't discuss what was happening, even with old friends. Only Sarah remained a constant support, but even she seemed changed by the discovery, spending more and more time discussing theories with her brother's team. The pressure reached a breaking point when James received an unexpected visit from federal authorities. Two serious-looking individuals in dark suits arrived unannounced, flashing credentials from an agency he'd never heard of. They spent hours questioning him about the discovery, particularly interested in Max's role and behavior. "Dogs don't just dig randomly," one agent said, his tone suggesting he believed James was hiding something. "There must have been a reason your dog chose that specific location." The interrogation left James shaken. That night, sitting on his porch with Max's head in his lap, he seriously questioned whether the discovery was a blessing or a curse. The farm's financial problems might be temporarily solved, but at what cost? His simple life had been replaced by something complex and potentially dangerous. The very ground beneath his feet, land that his family had worked for generations, now felt alien and unpredictable. What he didn't know was that the real challenges were just beginning. The mysterious changes in the artifact were accelerating, and deep beneath the farm, something was stirring. The ancient structure wasn't just a relic of a lost civilization, it was something far more active and far more significant than anyone had imagined. Things took a dramatic turn one stormy October evening. The archaeology team had finally reached what they believed to be the main entrance to the buried structure when everything went wrong. The day had started with unusual atmospheric readings. The sensitive equipment around the site had been registering electromagnetic disturbances unlike anything the scientists had seen before. Max had been especially agitated, refusing to eat and pacing frantically around the farmhouse. James was in his kitchen with Sarah and Marcus, reviewing the latest lease agreement amendments when the first tremor hit. It wasn't like a normal earthquake. Instead of a rolling motion, it felt more like a pulse, as if something deep underground had suddenly shifted. The lights flickered, and every electronic device in the house went dark. "That's impossible," Marcus muttered, staring at his dead phone. "We're not even in a seismic zone." Before he could finish his thought, a second, stronger pulse shook the building. Through the window, they could see the excavation team scrambling away from the site as emergency lights bathed the area in an eerie red glow. The scene outside was chaos. The carefully constructed scaffolding around the excavation had begun to sink into the ground, taking thousands of dollars worth of equipment with it. The mysterious artifact, still in its containment unit, was emitting a faint blue light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the tremors. Max was barking frantically, trying to break through the security fence to reach the site. "Everyone back!" Patricia shouted, running toward them with a radiation detector that was screaming with alarm. "We're getting readings off the scale. Something's happening with the structure!" The next pulse was strong enough to knock everyone off their feet. James watched in horror as fissures began spreading across his land, radiating outward from the excavation site like cracks in glass. The ground around the dig began to sink, forming a perfect circular depression that was slowly but steadily growing larger. "We need to evacuate," one of the security team leaders announced over the emergency channel. "Now, get everyone out of the hot zone." But James couldn't move. This was his land, his family's legacy. He couldn't just abandon it. Sarah grabbed his arm, trying to pull him toward the vehicles. "James, please, it's not safe." But he shrugged her off, his eyes fixed on Max, who was still trying desperately to reach the excavation site. The dog seemed to know something they didn't, and after everything that had happened, James trusted Max's instincts more than any human expert. Making a split-second decision, James sprinted toward his dog. The security team was too busy with the evacuation to stop him as he vaulted over the fence and released Max from his collar. Immediately, the dog bounded toward the sinking artifact containment unit, with James close behind. "Mitchell, stop!" Marcus's voice cracked with panic. "The radiation levels—" But his warning was cut off by another pulse, stronger than all the others. This time, the ground didn't just shake, it split open. A chasm formed between James and the evacuation zone, cutting off any possibility of retreat. The containment unit had nearly disappeared into the growing sinkhole when Max reached it. The dog began pawing frantically at the security locks, whining with an urgency James had never heard before. Without thinking, James helped him, his fingers fumbling with the mechanisms as the ground continued to sink beneath them. "Don't open." "That!" Patricia screamed from across the chasm. "The energy readings are—" But it was too late. The containment unit seals hissed open, and the artifact inside blazed with brilliant blue light. For a moment, James thought he could see the symbols on its surface moving, rearranging themselves like living things. Then everything went silent. The tremors stopped, the fissures ceased spreading, even the air seemed to hold its breath. In that moment of absolute stillness, James heard something impossible, a sound like distant music coming from deep within. The earth. Max's ears perked up, and the dog tilted his head in that familiar way, as if listening to something beyond human perception. The artifact's glow pulsed once, twice, and then started to fade. As it dimmed, James noticed something had changed. The symbols on its surface had shifted into a new configuration, and at its center, a small section had opened like a flower, blooming. Inside was what looked like a crystal, no larger than a thumb. It caught the fading light and scattered it in impossible patterns across the devastated landscape. Without thinking, James reached for it, and the moment his fingers touched its surface, everything changed. Images flooded his mind. Vast cities buried beneath the earth, machines that defied physics, and beings that seemed both human and something more. He saw how they had hidden their greatest achievements when disaster threatened their civilization, seeding sites like this one across the globe. He understood why Max had been drawn to this spot, why the dog had known exactly where to dig. The crystal wasn't just a key or a record, it was a message, waiting millennia for the right moment to be found. The vision ended as suddenly as it had begun, leaving James gasping on his knees beside the containment unit. The ground had stabilized, but the damage was done. The excavation site was ruined, months of careful work destroyed in minutes. Equipment worth millions lay buried or broken, and the geometric structure they'd been trying to reach was now deeper than ever, hidden beneath tons of collapsed earth. Sarah's voice brought him back to reality. She was calling his name from across the chasm, her voice thick with tears. Marcus was already on the phone, presumably calling in every expert and emergency response team he could think of. The security team was setting up a wider perimeter, and in the distance, James could hear sirens approaching. But none of that seemed to matter as much as what he now held in his hand, a crystal that contained the truth about human history, about civilizations lost to time, about why this particular piece of land had been chosen thousands of years ago. Max sat beside him, calmer now, as if his mission had finally been accomplished. The immediate crisis had passed, but James knew this was just the beginning of a new set of challenges. The government would want answers about what had happened. Here, the university's lawyers would be apoplectic about the breach of safety protocols. His farm had been essentially destroyed, the land rendered unusable for agriculture, even if the radiation levels subsided. Yet, somehow, none of these problems filled him with the same dread as before. The crystal in his hand pulsed warmly, like a heartbeat, and he knew that everything, his family's legacy, the farm's purpose, Max's strange behavior, had been leading to this moment. The real question was, what would he do with this knowledge? And more importantly, what would others do to try to take it from him? As the emergency teams began arriving and Sarah finally made her way around the chasm to reach him, James clutched the crystal tightly and looked down at Max. The dog met his gaze with those intelligent eyes, and James knew they were both thinking the same thing. Their journey wasn't ending here. It was just beginning. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, James found himself at the center of a storm. His farm had become a restricted zone, cordoned off by various government agencies whose acronyms he couldn't keep straight. The university team had been temporarily banned from the site, pending multiple investigations, and James himself was facing potential criminal charges for breaching safety protocols. But help would come from an unexpected direction. Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived 3 days after the incident. Unlike the other officials who had swarmed the farm, she came alone in an unmarked car, her credentials identifying her as part of a small, independent research organization. What made her different was that she wasn't interested in the destruction or the legal implications. She wanted to talk about what James had seen when he touched the crystal. "You're not the first, you know," she said, sitting at his kitchen table while Max watched her intently. They were in the farmhouse, which had somehow survived the incident relatively unscathed. Throughout history, there have been others who've encountered similar artifacts. Most were dismissed as crazy, some were silenced, a few managed to record their experiences, though the records were often destroyed or hidden. James studied her carefully, the crystal's warmth still pulsing in his pocket where he'd kept it hidden since that night. "Why should I trust you?" Elena smiled and reached into her bag, pulling out what looked like an old journal. "Because I'm part of a group that's been waiting for this moment for generations. We call ourselves the Keepers, and we've been protecting knowledge of the ancient civilization since they first went into hiding." She opened the journal, revealing pages of detailed drawings, symbols identical to those on the artifact, sketches of crystals similar to the one James had found, and maps marking locations across the globe. "Your farm isn't the only site, Mr. Mitchell. It's just the first to become active in our lifetime." As James flipped through the journal, Elena explained how her organization had been tracking unusual archaeological discoveries and unexplained phenomena for decades. They had identified patterns, gathered evidence, and waited for the moment when one of the ancient sites would reveal itself. "The dog was the key," she said, nodding toward Max. "They left markers that only certain animals can sense. In the past, it was often wolves or foxes that led people to the sites. Your Max is special. He has the ability to detect what they left behind." The more Elena talked, the more pieces started falling into place. She explained how the electromagnetic disturbances, the strange dreams reported by the research team, and even the unusual weather patterns were all connected to the site's awakening. But most importantly, she offered James something he desperately needed: a way forward. "The government agencies will leave eventually," she explained. "They won't find anything they can understand. The university will be tied up in legal battles for years. But we can help you protect what you found, and more importantly, we can help you understand how to use it." James thought about the visions he'd seen, the incredible knowledge that had flooded his mind when he touched the crystal. The ancient civilization, they didn't just leave artifacts, did they? They left instructions. Elena's eyes lit up. Exactly. They knew their knowledge would be rediscovered eventually, but they wanted to ensure it would be found by the right people at the right time. People who would use it wisely. Over the next few days, Elena introduced James to other members of her organization. Dr. Chen Wei, a quantum physicist who had spent years studying similar electromagnetic anomalies at sites around the world. Maria Santos, an anthropologist who specialized in analyzing the symbolic language found at various archaeological sites. Each of them brought pieces of a puzzle that was slowly coming together, but it was Sarah who proved to be the most valuable. When James finally showed her the crystal and told her everything he'd seen, she didn't doubt him for a moment. Instead, she revealed something of her own. She'd been having strange dreams ever since the discovery, dreams that matched some of the visions James had experienced. "I think that's why Max trusts me," she said. "He knows I can sense it too, even if not as strongly as he can." The support network that formed around James grew stronger as they began to understand the true significance of what they'd found. Elena's organization provided legal protection, helping James navigate the complex investigations and interviews. They also brought in experts who could help document and understand the knowledge contained in the crystal without drawing unwanted attention. Max's role became clearer too. The dog wasn't just sensitive to the ancient markers, he was actively connected to them. He could lead them to other hidden symbols and patterns on the farm that the initial excavation had missed. With Elena's guidance, they began mapping these markers, revealing a complex network of energy lines that crisscrossed the property. The ancient civilization didn't just build structures, Elena explained as they walked the property one evening. They created entire landscapes that functioned as both power systems and information networks. Your farm sits at a crucial intersection point. The revelation changed how James saw his family's legacy. For generations, the Mitchells had been drawn to this land, working it, protecting it, somehow knowing it was special without understanding why. Even the drought that had nearly ruined him seemed to have a purpose. The dry soil had made it possible for Max to detect what was hidden beneath. As the weeks passed, the government presence began to thin out, just as Elena had predicted. The official investigation concluded that the incident had been caused by an unexpected geological event, and while the university faced sanctions for safety violations, James was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing. But the real work was just beginning. With the help of Elena's network, James began the process of transforming his farm into something new. On the surface, it would appear to be a research station studying sustainable agriculture. A cover story that explained the continued presence of scientists and specialized equipment. But beneath that facade, they would be working to understand and protect the ancient knowledge they'd discovered. Sarah took on a crucial role, using her veterinary expertise to study the unique connection between animals and the ancient sites. She discovered that certain breeds of dogs, cats, and even birds showed heightened sensitivity to the energy patterns, and she began developing ways to work with these animals to locate other potential sites. The crystal itself proved to be more complex than anyone had imagined. Each time James connected with it, he received new information, as if the ancient civilization had designed it to gradually reveal its secrets as the recipients became ready to understand them. The knowledge ranged from advanced physics to biological engineering, from sustainable energy systems to methods of consciousness expansion. But perhaps most importantly, James found a new purpose. His farm was no longer just a piece of land to be worked. It was a guardian site, a place where ancient wisdom could safely emerge into the modern world. The financial struggles that had once threatened to destroy him became insignificant in the face of this greater mission. Max seemed to understand the transformation better than anyone. The dog had become calmer, more focused, as if satisfied that his most important task had been accomplished. He still patrolled the property regularly, but now it was with the air of a guardian rather than a searcher. As James sat on his porch one evening, watching the sun set over his transformed land, he felt a deep sense of rightness. Elena sat beside him, reviewing plans for the research station's construction, while Sarah worked in the makeshift lab they'd set up in the old barn. Max lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to track the movement of invisible energy lines only he could sense. "You know," Eleanor said, looking up from her papers, "when we first identified this site, we weren't sure if we'd find what we were looking for. But your connection to the land, Max's abilities, Sarah's sensitivity, it's like all the pieces were already in place, just waiting to come together." James nodded, feeling the crystal's warm pulse in his pocket. The ancient civilization had chosen this place carefully, trusted his family to protect it for generations, and now had entrusted him with their greatest secrets. The challenges ahead were enormous, but for the first time in years, he felt truly ready to face them. Before we continue with this incredible story, I'd like to take a moment to thank you all for your amazing support. If you're enjoying this journey of discovery and ancient mysteries, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more fascinating stories like this one to life. Now, let's continue with our extraordinary tale. The transformation of the Mitchell farm into a research facility brought new challenges and discoveries almost daily. The cover story of sustainable agriculture research proved to be surprisingly effective. It explained the presence of unusual equipment, the coming and going of scientists, and even the restricted areas around the original excavation site. But beneath this facade, something far more extraordinary was taking shape. One morning, about a month after Elena's arrival, James made a breakthrough with the crystal that changed everything. He had been experimenting with it in the converted barn laboratory, with Sarah and Elena present to document any findings, when Max's behavior caught his attention. The dog had been sleeping in his usual spot by the door, but suddenly sat up, ears perked, staring intently at the crystal in James's hands. "Look at this," Sarah whispered, pointing to her monitoring equipment. The screens showed unprecedented patterns of electromagnetic activity, forming geometric shapes that matched the symbols found on the original artifact. As they watched, Max walked over to James and gently pressed his nose against the crystal. The reaction was immediate and astonishing. The crystal's usual warm pulse transformed into a brilliant glow, and the air in the lab seemed to thicken with invisible energy. James felt the familiar rush of information flooding his mind, but this time it was different. Clearer, more focused. Through his connection with the crystal, he could sense Max's consciousness joining with his own, adding a new dimension to the ancient knowledge. They didn't just leave us information, James gasped as the vision clarified. They left us tools, ways to enhance human consciousness, to bridge the gap between species. Max isn't just detecting the sites. He's meant to be part of the interface. Elena quickly documented everything, while Sarah monitored their vital signs. The connection lasted for several minutes, during which James and Max remained perfectly still, locked in silent communion with the ancient knowledge. When it finally faded, both man and dog seemed energized rather than drained. The ancient civilization, James explained, still processing what he'd learned, they understood that humans alone couldn't maintain the balance they'd created. They needed other species, dogs especially, to help maintain and protect their network of sites. That's why they encoded the information in ways that would attract both human and animal guardians. This discovery led to a flurry of new research directions. Sarah began working with other dogs, testing them for sensitivity to the crystal's energy. Elena's network brought in experts in animal cognition and interspecies communication. The barn laboratory expanded to include new equipment designed to measure and map the subtle energies they were discovering. But with progress came attention, and not all of it welcome. Despite their careful security measures, rumors about the Mitchell Farm's transformation had begun to spread beyond the local community. Amateur paranormal investigators started camping out along the property boundaries. Conspiracy theory websites posted blurry photos of the research facility, spinning wild tales about government experiments and alien technology. More worryingly, James began noticing unmarked vehicles parked at a distance, watching the farm. Elena confirmed his suspicions. Other groups were interested in what they'd found, groups that didn't share their commitment to protecting the ancient knowledge. "We always knew this would happen," Elena said during an emergency meeting with the core team. The ancient civilization left similar sites around the world, but they also warned that their knowledge could be dangerous if misused. That's why they created such specific conditions for its discovery. The combination of the right location, the right human consciousness, and the right animal companion. The pressure mounted as mysterious offers began arriving. Blank checks from private research firms, partnership proposals from military contractors, even unofficial overtures from foreign governments. Each was politely but firmly declined, but James could sense the increasing frustration of those being denied access to the site. Then came the attempts at infiltration. A supposed graduate student was caught trying to plant surveillance equipment near the laboratory. A wealthy potential investor turned out to be working for a private military company. Even some of James's old neighbors offered substantial bribes for information, had to be politely but firmly distanced from the project. Through it all, Max remained their most reliable security system. The dog could sense deception in visitors, often alerting them to hidden agendas before any human could spot them. His connection to the crystal had grown stronger, and with it, his ability to monitor the invisible energy networks that crisscrossed the property had become almost supernatural. Sarah's research revealed why this was possible. The ancient civilization understood something we're only beginning to grasp, she explained during one of their daily briefings. Dogs don't just have superior senses, they have the ability to perceive and interact with energy fields that humans can barely detect. They weren't just leaving their knowledge for humans to find, they were creating a partnership between species. This understanding led to new protocols at the facility. Every research team now included at least one dog-human partnership, with Sarah training both species to work together more effectively. The results were remarkable. Breakthrough discoveries came more frequently, and their understanding of the ancient knowledge expanded exponentially. James found himself growing into his role as the site's primary guardian. The crystal had changed him in subtle but significant ways. He could now sense the energy lines without Max's help, though never as clearly as his canine partner. His dreams were filled with increasingly detailed visions of the ancient civilization, each adding another piece to the grand puzzle they were assembling. Elena's network provided crucial support, helping to process and protect the knowledge they were uncovering. They established secure communications channels, created backup systems for their discoveries, and prepared contingency plans for various potential threats. The Mitchell farm had become more than just a research facility. It was now a crucial node in a growing network of sites around the world. They're all connected, James explained one evening as he, Sarah, and Elena reviewed the latest data. Each site contains different pieces of their knowledge, but they're meant to work together. The ancient civilization didn't just hide their secrets. They created a vast network, waiting to be rediscovered when humanity was ready. As if to confirm his words, Max suddenly raised his head, his ears twitching. The crystal in James's pocket pulsed with unusual warmth, and all the monitoring equipment in the lab lit up with new activity. Something was happening, not just here, but at other sites around the world. The ancient network was awakening, and the Mitchell farm was at the heart of it all. That evening marked the beginning of what the team would later call the awakening. As their monitoring equipment lit up with unprecedented activity, signals began coming in from Elena's contacts around the world. Other sites were activating, and in each location the pattern was the same: dogs leading humans to discoveries that had lain dormant for millennia. "It's like a cascade effect," Elena explained, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she coordinated with teams globally. "The activation of our crystal seems to have triggered a response in other sites. We're seeing similar energy signatures in Peru, Egypt, Cambodia, and dozens of other locations." Her voice trembled with barely contained excitement as she pulled up satellite imagery, showing the spread of activation points across the globe. James stood in the center of their command room, formerly his grandfather's old barn, watching as new data points appeared on their global monitoring screen. The transformation of this space from a simple storage area to a high-tech command center still amazed him. Where farm equipment once gathered dust, now banks of computers hummed with activity. The old wooden beams above were now strung with advanced sensors, their blinking lights reflecting off the weathered wood in a strange dance of old and new. Max sat alert at his feet, occasionally whining softly as each new site came online. The crystal in James's pocket had grown almost hot, its pulsing now synchronized with the worldwide energy surges they were detecting. The dog's ears twitched with each new pulse, and his eyes never left the main display screen. "The readings are off the charts," Dr. Chenway announced from his station, adjusting his glasses as he studied the incoming data. "The energy signatures are perfectly coherent across all sites, despite the geographical distances involved. It defies everything we know about quantum entanglement." Sarah burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement, nearly colliding with a junior researcher in her haste. "You need to see this," she said, grabbing James's arm. "All the animals on the farm are reacting. It's not just Max anymore. Every dog, cat, even the wild birds are responding to something." The team followed her outside, where they were met with an extraordinary sight. The night sky above the farm had taken on an unusual quality. Subtle waves of light, like a localized aurora borealis, danced above the original excavation site. The colors shifted from deep purple to electric blue, forming patterns that seemed almost mathematical in their precision. More remarkably, similar phenomena were being reported at each of the newly activated locations. "The patterns," Elena murmured, recording the display with specialized equipment. "They're identical at every site, just phase-shifted based on local time. It's as if the entire network is synchronizing itself." "It's more than that," James said, the crystal's energy helping him understand what they were witnessing. "The ancient civilization, they built redundancy into their system. When enough sites activated simultaneously, it would trigger a global response. This is what they were waiting for." The scientific equipment they'd set up around the farm began recording unprecedented levels of coherent energy. The patterns weren't just random. They contained information, vast amounts of it. As James held the crystal, he could sense fragments of the message being transmitted, instructions, warnings, and most importantly, hope. The data streamed through his consciousness like a river, each drop a piece of knowledge that had waited millennia to be rediscovered. "The energy readings are becoming more organized," Patricia called out from her mobile monitoring station. "It's as if the network is establishing some kind of communication protocol. These patterns, they're not just energy signatures, they're a language." James watched as Max circled the area, stopping at precise points that corresponded with peaks in the energy readings. The dog moved with purpose, as if following an invisible map that only he could see. Each time he stopped, the crystal in James's pocket would pulse more strongly, and new data would flood their senses. "They didn't just disappear," James whispered, the revelation hitting him with stunning clarity. "They transformed. The ancient civilization didn't die out. They evolved into something else. And they left all this to show us the way." His voice carried the weight of understanding that went beyond mere words, touched by knowledge that seemed to flow directly from the crystal itself. Max suddenly barked, a sharp, clear sound that echoed across the farm. At that exact moment, every piece of electronic equipment they had went dark. The abrupt silence was deafening, broken only by the soft wind and the collective intake of breath from the assembled team. Before anyone could panic, they were replaced by three-dimensional holograms sprouting from the ground like luminescent plants. The images showed cities unlike anything in human history. Structures that seemed to defy gravity, built from materials that shimmered with internal light. They saw technologies that defied current physics, energy systems that drew power from the fabric of space itself, transportation methods that bent the laws of space-time, and medical advances that could reshape life at its most fundamental level. But most remarkably, they saw beings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their forms shifting and flowing like living light. "It's their story," Elena breathed, watching as the images shifted and flowed. "They're showing us their journey. Look at the progression from a civilization not unlike our own to this." She gestured at an image of what appeared to be a city that existed as much in energy as in matter. "They're showing us more than that," Sarah added, her scientific training warring with the wonder of what she was witnessing. "These aren't just historical records. They're instructions, a roadmap for humanity's own evolution." The holograms lasted for exactly 1 hour. When they faded, the regular equipment came back online, but everything had changed. The data they'd recorded during the event would take years to fully analyze, but even the initial readings showed that they'd received more information in that single hour than in all their previous research combined. But the most significant victory wasn't just in the information they'd received, it was in the validation of their approach. The ancient civilization had built safeguards into their system, ensuring that their knowledge could only be accessed by those who would use it responsibly. The combination of human consciousness, animal awareness, and ethical intention had been crucial to unlocking their legacy. "Look at this," Sarah called out, pointing to her tablet. Reports were coming in from the other sites. In each location, the discoveries had been made by people working in harmony with animals, usually dogs. No amount of high-tech equipment or forced excavation had been able to access the sites. They had only revealed themselves to partnerships based on trust and mutual respect. As the night progressed, more revelations followed. The crystal began, sharing clearer, more detailed information about the ancient civilization's intentions. They hadn't just left behind advanced technology. They'd created a roadmap for humanity's evolution, showing a path toward a future where humans, animals, and technology could exist in perfect balance. The days following the global activation were filled with feverish activity. Teams around the world worked around the clock to process the vast amount of data they'd received, sharing findings through Elena's secure network. The Mitchell farm, as the site of the first activation, became the de facto headquarters for this unprecedented scientific endeavor. James noticed that Max's abilities had grown exponentially since the event. The dog could now perceive the energy networks with such precision that he began leading them to previously undiscovered markers across the property. Each new find added another piece to their understanding of the ancient civilization's legacy. "It's like he's reading a map we can't see," Sarah observed one morning, watching Max methodically work his way across a section of the farm they thought they'd fully explored. The activation didn't just trigger the sights, it enhanced the abilities they engineered into certain animals thousands of years ago. The dog stopped at what appeared to be an ordinary patch of ground and began pawing gently at the earth. James approached with the crystal, which immediately responded with a strong pulse. As they carefully excavated the area, they found another, smaller artifact, this one shaped like a perfect sphere. "The craftsmanship is identical to the first artifact," Elena noted, scanning it with their most sensitive equipment. "But the energy signature is different. It's not transmitting information, it's receiving it." This discovery led to a breakthrough in their understanding of the ancient network. The original artifact had been a beacon designed to trigger the global activation. This new sphere appeared to be part of a vast communication system, capable of receiving transmissions from other sites around the world. The implications were staggering. As they set up new equipment to monitor the sphere, they began receiving streams of data from other activated locations. Each site, it seemed, held different pieces of the ancient civilization's knowledge. Some focused on energy technologies, others on biological advancement, still others on consciousness expansion. They distributed their knowledge deliberately, James explained during a team briefing. "No single site contains everything. They wanted us to work together, to share what we learned. It's not just about the technology. It's about proving we can cooperate on a global scale." The sphere's data streams revealed another crucial detail about the ancient civilization's plan. They hadn't just hidden their technology. They had seeded the Earth with a network of self-repairing, evolving systems. The energy lines that Max could sense were actually part of a planetary-scale technology that had been quietly maintaining itself for millennia. Sarah's research with other animals revealed that certain species had been subtly influenced by these systems over generations. Dogs, in particular, showed signs of carefully engineered genetic markers that enhanced their ability to interact with the ancient technology. "Look at this," she said, showing James and Elena her latest findings. "The markers aren't just in Max's DNA. They're in most dog breeds, just expressed to different degrees. They've been preparing for this moment for thousands of years, gradually developing the capabilities they'd need to help us rediscover their legacy." The farm itself was transforming. The energy network, now fully activated, began influencing the surrounding environment. The drought-stricken soil showed signs of regeneration. Plants grew with unprecedented vigor. Even the weather patterns seemed to be shifting, bringing gentle rains that felt almost guided in their precision. Elena's network provided crucial context as similar changes were observed at other sites. "It's not terraforming," she explained. "It's restoration. They left us systems to heal the damage we've done to the Earth, but only once we proved we could understand and respect their purpose. But with progress came new challenges. The unusual phenomena at the farm were becoming harder to hide. Satellite images showed distinct energy patterns centered on their location, drawing unwanted attention from various organizations. Security became an increasing concern as more people began to realize that something extraordinary was happening at the Mitchell farm. James found himself in a delicate position. The crystal had shown him that the ancient civilization wanted their knowledge, shared with humanity, but only at the right pace and in the right way. Too much too quickly could be dangerous, leading to misuse or misunderstanding of their advanced technologies. They were very clear about this, he told his core team during a late-night strategy session. The knowledge has to be earned. Each piece builds on the last, requiring us to demonstrate understanding before we can access more. Max, who had been dozing nearby, suddenly lifted his head and stared intently at the sphere. Moments later, their monitors detected a new signal, different from anything they'd seen before. As they watched, the sphere projected a series of images showing the ancient civilization's own journey of discovery. They faced the same challenges. Elena realized, watching the holographic display, they had to learn to balance technological progress with ethical development. That's why they created this system, to ensure we don't repeat their early mistakes. The projections showed how the ancient civilization had nearly destroyed themselves before learning to work in harmony with their planet's natural systems. Their most advanced technologies weren't based on domination or exploitation, but on cooperation and enhancement of natural processes. Sarah noticed something else in the recordings. Look at their relationship with animals, she pointed out. As their civilization advanced, they didn't just use animals, they partnered with them. The abilities they engineered into dogs weren't about control, they were about communication. This understanding led to new research directions. Instead of just studying the ancient technology, they began exploring ways to enhance the natural connections that already existed between species. The results were promising. Other dogs began showing abilities similar to Max's, though none quite as developed. As word of their work spread through scientific channels, more researchers sought to join their team. Elena carefully vetted each application, looking not just for scientific qualifications, but for the ethical understanding that the ancient civilization had emphasized as crucial. The momentum of their discoveries was building, but James knew they were still just at the beginning. The crystal had shown him glimpses of possibilities that seemed like magic by today's standards. But achieving them would require humanity to grow not just technologically, but spiritually and ethically as well. 1 year after the initial discovery, James stood on his porch at sunrise, Max by his side, watching teams of researchers and their canine partners working across what had become known as the Integration Center. His once struggling farm had transformed into humanity's primary site for understanding and implementing the ancient civilization's legacy. The crystal in his pocket pulsed warmly, no longer just a storage device, but a living connection to knowledge that was transforming human understanding of reality itself. Max's tail wagged gently as another pulse of energy rippled through the global network they'd helped activate. "It's time," Elena said, approaching with Sarah and the core team. "The sphere is showing signs of the final activation sequence." They had known this moment was coming. Over the past year, they'd unlocked progressive layers of the ancient civilization's knowledge, each revelation requiring humanity to demonstrate its readiness for the next. Now, all sites worldwide were synchronized, preparing for what the crystal had hinted would be the most significant revelation of all. Inside the main research facility, formerly his grandfather's barn, James watched as monitoring screens showed energy signatures building across the global network. Max took his position next to the sphere, which had begun to emit a soft, pulsing light that matched the crystal's rhythm. "All sites report ready," Elena confirmed, coordinating with teams worldwide. "Everyone's in position." James placed the crystal in its specially designed interface near the sphere. The moment the two artifacts connected, the air itself seemed to come alive with possibility. Max let out a soft whine as the holographic projections began, more detailed, more real than anything they'd seen before. The final message from the ancient civilization unfolded before them in living light. They saw not just recordings or instructions, but the actual story of their predecessors' transformation. The beings they'd thought had vanished had actually evolved beyond physical form, achieving a state of existence that merged consciousness with energy itself. They never left, James breathed, understanding flowing through him. They've been here all along, existing in a dimension parallel to our own, waiting for us to develop the capability to perceive them. The holographic display shifted, showing how the ancient civilization had discovered that consciousness itself was the fundamental force of the universe. Their greatest achievement hadn't been technological. It had been the understanding that awareness, in all its forms, was the key to unlocking reality's deeper layers. "Look at what they're showing us about the animals," Sarah gasped. The projections revealed that species like dogs hadn't just been engineered to detect the ancient technology. They had been enhanced to perceive these higher dimensions naturally. Max and his kind had always been able to sense the ancient civilization's presence, explaining behaviors that humans had dismissed as mere animal instinct. As the final sequence played out, the message became clear. The ancient civilization hadn't hidden their knowledge to test humanity. They'd done it to prepare us. Each discovery, each activation, had been carefully designed to gradually expand human consciousness and understanding. The network, the artifacts, even the genetic modifications in dogs. It was all to help us bridge the gap, Elena realized, watching as the projections showed the next phase of human evolution. They're not just teaching us about their technology, they're showing us how to follow their path. The sphere and crystal pulsed in perfect synchronization as the ancient civilization revealed their ultimate gift, the knowledge of how to expand human consciousness beyond the limitations of physical form. But it wasn't about abandoning our current existence. It was about learning to perceive and interact with all layers of reality simultaneously. "That's why they needed the dogs," James said, watching Max as understanding dawned. "They exist partially, in both states already. They've been our guides, not just our companions." The final moments of the transmission showed something extraordinary: the possibility of direct communication with the ancient civilization itself. They hadn't been waiting idly. They'd been actively maintaining the balance of Earth's subtle energy systems, preserving the potential for humanity's advancement. As the projections faded, James felt a profound shift in his awareness. The crystal and sphere had done more than just show them the truth. They had activated something within the witnesses themselves. Around the room, people gasped as their perception expanded, allowing them to glimpse, for the first time, the larger reality that had always surrounded them. Max wagged his tail, finally able to share his view of the world with his human partners. The dog's consciousness merged briefly with James's, showing him the beautiful complexity of the energy fields that permeated everything, the subtle presence of their ancient predecessors, and the infinite potential that lay before them. "This is just the beginning," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "They're offering to guide us through our own transformation." The implications were staggering. Humanity stood on the brink of an evolutionary leap that would redefine our understanding of existence itself. But the ancient civilization had been clear. This wasn't a gift to be rushed or forced. It would require careful integration, global cooperation, and a fundamental shift in how humans viewed their relationship with each other, with other species, and with reality itself. James looked around at his transformed farm, remembering the desperate man he'd been just a year ago, worried about bank loans and failing crops. The land had had a greater purpose all along, not just as a repository of ancient knowledge, but as a beacon for humanity's future. Max pressed against his leg, and James felt the truth of their partnership. Dogs hadn't just been humanity's best friends, they had been our patient teachers, waiting for us to evolve enough to understand what they had always known. Final engagement moment. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of discovery. As humanity stands on the brink of its greatest transformation, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you think this new understanding of reality will change our world? What role do you think our animal companions will play in our evolution? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to follow humanity's next steps into a future beyond our wildest dreams. Sarah approached James as the team began to discuss their next steps. "So," she said with a smile, "ready to help guide humanity into a new age of existence?" James looked down at Max, then out at his farm, where teams of humans and dogs worked together in perfect harmony, each site worldwide now awakened and synchronized, preparing for the next phase of human evolution. The crystal pulsed warmly in his pocket, a constant reminder of the extraordinary journey ahead. "You know what, Sarah? I think we've been ready all along. We just needed the right guides to show us the way." Sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't found in distant galaxies or deep beneath the earth, but in the connections we forge with the beings who have been beside us all along. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.